What if walking into a jewelry store turned into a nightmare? What if asking to see a necklace made you a suspect? And what if, just when things seemed hopeless, your father walked in, revealing a truth that left everyone speechless? This shocking story of injustice, power, and accountability will leave you stunned. Watch till the end to see how one moment changed everything. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to support more powerful stories. Jasmine Carter had been dreaming about this day for what felt like forever. It was a crisp, bright afternoon in Chicago when she finally stepped through the revolving glass doors of Lancaster Jewelers, a name that shone as brightly as the displays behind its polished windows. You could tell from the moment she walked in that this wasn't just any store. It was the kind of place where every piece of jewelry was practically a work of art, and every customer was expected to be as refined as the glittering diamonds on display. Jasmine was only 16, but she carried herself with a quiet confidence that belied her years. She had spent months saving every spare cent from babysitting gigs and weekend shifts at the local bookstore. All those long hours, the sacrifices, and the little hopes had been for this one moment, to buy a very special gift for her mother's birthday. And yet, the moment she crossed the threshold, the atmosphere changed. "Hey, do you see how she walks in?" A hushed voice whispered from behind a display case. It wasn't loud enough for Jasmine to catch every word, but it was clear enough that something was amiss. As she made her way further into the store, the friendly smiles and polite nods that greeted other customers seemed to vanish into thin air. Instead, all eyes, especially those belonging to the staff, tracked her every move. Standing behind the gleaming counter was Catherine Whitmore, the store's manager. Catherine had a reputation for being impeccable in her presentation and curt in her manner. When her eyes fell on Jasmine, something shifted immediately. There was a brief moment, a barely noticeable flicker, where Catherine's warm, polished expression gave way to a cold, measured gaze. It was as if she had an inner memo that said, "Keep an eye on her." And sure enough, a subtle nod to one of the younger sales associates confirmed it. Jasmine tried to ignore the prickling feeling of being scrutinized. "I'm here to find something really special for my mom," she thought to herself as she walked confidently toward the counter. She approached with a steady pace, her heart beating just a little faster than usual, not from nervousness about the expensive jewelry, but because she sensed something was off. When she finally reached the counter, the display of glittering jewelry seemed to shine even brighter under the weight of the situation. "Good afternoon," Jasmine said, her voice friendly yet determined. "I'm looking for a diamond necklace." She pointed discreetly toward a stunning piece, a delicate chain of white gold supporting a diamond pendant that sparkled with an almost ethereal glow. Catherine leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing just a touch as she regarded Jasmine. "That one is quite expensive," Catherine replied in a tone that was more dismissive than helpful. "I'm not sure it fits your budget." The words hung in the air like a judgment, and for a moment, Jasmine felt the sting of those assumptions. It was as if the store had silently decided that she, a young black girl, couldn't possibly afford something so luxurious. Jasmine took a deep breath. "I've saved for a long time for this," she said, keeping her voice calm despite the rising tension. There was a conversational, almost casual quality to her tone, a way of speaking that said, "I'm here and I belong." Even as the staff exchanged subtle glances and hushed whispers behind her back, she refused to let the situation shake her. In that moment, the store seemed to hold its breath. The opulence of Lancaster Jewelers, the polished marble floors, and the array of expensive gems were all overshadowed by the weight of unspoken assumptions. The bright showroom lights and the soft hum of background music felt strangely distant as Jasmine focused solely on her goal. The sales associate, a young woman with kind eyes, briefly looked at Jasmine and offered a small, encouraging smile. But it was quickly overridden by the stern demeanor of Catherine, who seemed determined to maintain an air of superiority. "Let me get that necklace for you," Catherine said, but there was an unmistakable hesitancy in her voice as she reached for the keys that locked the glass case. Time seemed to slow down. Jasmine's mind raced, not with thoughts of luxury or sparkle, but with questions. Why was it so hard for her to be seen as just a customer? Why did she have to work twice as hard to be treated with the same courtesy? Even as these thoughts whirled in her head, she tried to focus on the present, on the piece of jewelry that could mean so much to her and her mother. The conversation at the counter felt both surreal and painfully familiar. "I really need to see it," Jasmine insisted, her tone steady, though her heart was pounding in protest. The air around them crackled with an unspoken tension that neither could ignore. Catherine's fingers hovered near the lock, then paused. For a fleeting second, it was as if she was wrestling with her own doubts, but then her resolve hardened. Instead of unlocking the case immediately, she whispered something to the associate at her side. Jasmine noticed the subtle exchange. A glance passed between them, a signal that this wasn't going according to the standard customer service protocol. The younger sales associate's eyes widened ever so slightly, and Jasmine could almost hear the silent conversation. "Keep watching her." It was a moment that crystallized everything Jasmine had been trying to ignore. The store wasn't just a place to buy jewelry. It was a stage for prejudices that had nothing to do with diamonds or gold. Even so, Jasmine tried to stay composed. "I'm not asking for a discount," she said softly, trying to maintain a conversational tone that was both respectful and assertive. "I just want to see the necklace." There was no shouting or dramatic confrontation, just a quiet request that should have been met with straightforward assistance. But instead of a warm "of course," she was met with a pause. The silence was heavy. Catherine's eyes met Jasmine's, and in that split second, the whole situation felt like a test of her worth, her patience, and her right to be there without having to prove anything extra. Jasmine could feel the judgment in every lingering glance, in every minute shift of posture from the staff around her. And yet, she held her head high. "I've worked hard for this," she repeated, her voice a blend of firmness and vulnerability that was all too human. It was as if every word she spoke was a tiny act of defiance against an unwritten rule that said she shouldn't be here. In that moment, with the dazzling jewelry around her and the heavy eyes of the staff weighing her down, Jasmine realized that this was not just a visit to a store. It was a quiet battle, one that she was determined to fight even if it meant simply standing her ground. Her dream of buying something beautiful for her mom was wrapped up in more than just the metal and stones. It was tied to her dignity, her resilience, and her refusal to be reduced to a stereotype. As the clock ticked slowly in the background, the atmosphere in Lancaster Jewelers shifted subtly, setting the stage for what was to come. Jasmine knew that today was only the beginning of a story that would force everyone involved to confront their own assumptions. And as she waited, with her heart pounding and her resolve hardening, she silently vowed that no one would ever tell her that she didn't belong, especially not in a place as splendid as this. Jasmine Carter could feel the shift in the air. It was subtle, but unmistakable, the kind of tension that seeped into a space like a slow-moving storm, crackling just beneath the surface. One second, she was standing at the jewelry counter, waiting for the store manager to take out the necklace she had asked to see, and the next, something changed. Catherine Whitmore didn't reach for the keys. She didn't unlock the case. Instead, her fingers twitched for a second like she was deciding on something. And then, with a quick, barely perceptible glance toward one of her employees, she whispered something. Jasmine's stomach tightened. She knew this feeling. The young sales associate, a woman with sleek blonde hair and a nervous energy, gave a small nod before stepping away. It wasn't obvious, not to most people at least. But Jasmine had seen it too many times before to mistake it for anything else. They were watching her. They were deciding what to do about her. And then Catherine turned and walked toward the register. Or at least, that's what she wanted it to look like. But Jasmine followed her movement carefully, her sharp eyes catching the way Catherine's real destination wasn't the register at all. It was the store's phone. Jasmine's pulse kicked up a notch. For a brief moment, she tried to reason with herself. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe Catherine really did need to take a quick call about something else entirely. But then she caught the way Catherine's posture changed. The way she turned just enough so Jasmine couldn't see her lips moving. The way the other employees exchanged quiet glances like they all knew something she didn't. Jasmine's throat went dry. She wasn't being treated like a customer. She was being treated like a problem, a threat, a suspect. The realization settled in her chest like a weight, heavy and familiar in a way she wished it wasn't. She had done nothing wrong. She had walked in, asked to see a necklace, and yet here she was, watching the store manager make a hushed phone call while the rest of the staff pretended not to notice. Jasmine exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. She kept her hands still at her sides, suddenly hyper-aware of every single movement she made. It felt like the entire store had changed its focus. A few minutes ago, she was just another shopper. Now she could feel the shift in attention, the way customers who had barely glanced at her before were now sneaking cautious looks her way. The older woman admiring a sapphire bracelet just a few feet away suddenly went stiff, her husband murmuring something in her ear. Jasmine clenched her jaw. This was it, the same silent script she had witnessed before. The quiet judgment, the quick, darting glances, the way people assumed, and then the front door chimed. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat as a uniformed police officer stepped inside. The entire room went still. For a split second, it felt like no one was breathing. The officer, a tall man with broad shoulders and a presence that commanded immediate attention, scanned the store. His gaze moved across the room, over the sleek display cases, the well-dressed customers, the staff that suddenly looked much more alert, before finally locking onto her. Jasmine felt it instantly. That look, that split-second decision in his eyes. He had already made up his mind. She wasn't just a teenager standing in a jewelry store. She was the reason he had been called. The officer took a slow step forward, his expression unreadable but his body language tense in a way that sent a cold chill down Jasmine's spine. His hand rested casually on his belt, not gripping his weapon but close enough to make a statement. Jasmine swallowed hard. This was happening. "Miss," the officer said, his voice firm but controlled, "I'm going to need to ask you a few questions." Jasmine forced herself to take a slow breath. This was the moment where everything could go wrong. She could already see how it would play out. If she raised her voice, she'd be aggressive. If she argued, she'd be difficult. If she questioned him, she'd be uncooperative. She had done nothing wrong, but none of that mattered. Because in this moment she knew with painful certainty that the burden of proof was on her. "Why?" she asked, keeping her voice steady even though her pulse was hammering in her ears. The officer's eyebrows lifted slightly, like the question had caught him off guard. "We received a call about a suspicious individual," he said, glancing briefly toward Catherine, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Jasmine let out a quiet breath that sounded almost like a laugh. There it was, suspicious. That word that meant everything and nothing at the same time. Jasmine shook her head, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I walked in," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I asked to see a necklace." The officer hesitated. For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Doubt, maybe, or maybe just the realization that this wasn't as simple as he had assumed, but before he could say anything, he took a step closer. "Do you have an ID on you?" Jasmine inhaled sharply. And there it was, the thing she had been waiting for. The request that wasn't really a request. The expectation that she needed to prove she belonged here. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't reach for her pocket. She could feel every set of eyes on her. She could hear the silence, thick and suffocating. And then, suddenly, clarity hit her like a bolt of lightning. She wasn't about to argue. She wasn't going to waste her breath trying to justify her presence. Instead, she lifted her chin, met the officer's gaze head-on, and spoke in a voice that was calm, unwavering, and filled with quiet authority. "I'd like to call my father." For the first time, Catherine's face twitched. She hadn't expected that. The officer hesitated, his jaw tightening slightly, but after a long beat, he sighed. "Go ahead." Jasmine's fingers moved quickly, dialing the number she knew by heart. The line barely rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. "Dad," Jasmine said, her voice tight but controlled, "I need you to come to Lancaster Jewelers, right now." There was a beat of silence. Then her father's voice came through, low and sharp. "I'm on my way." He hung up. Jasmine exhaled slowly and slid her phone back into her pocket. No one in this store was prepared for what was about to happen next. The tension in the store was thick enough to choke on. Jasmine stood still, her hands at her sides, fingers curled into fists as she counted the seconds in her head. She wasn't panicked, not yet, but the weight of the moment pressed down on her like a slow-moving tidal wave. The officer stood a few feet away, arms crossed, still waiting for an answer he wasn't going to get. Catherine hovered behind the counter, trying her best to look composed, but there was a stiffness in her shoulders now, a slight twitch in her fingers that betrayed her nervousness. And then the door swung open. The chime that had sounded so innocent earlier now rang through the silent store like a gunshot. Jasmine didn't have to turn around. She didn't have to check. She felt it. The shift in the air. The way everything changed. For the past 10 minutes, she had been treated like she didn't belong. Like she was some kind of intruder in this pristine, high-end jewelry store. But now her father had arrived. And suddenly, everyone in the room seemed painfully aware of what they had done. Malcolm Carter wasn't just any man. He wasn't just any father. He was the director of the FBI, and when he walked into a room, people noticed. He wasn't loud. He wasn't aggressive. He didn't need to be. His presence alone commanded attention. Dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, he moved with the quiet authority of a man who had spent his entire career walking into high-stakes situations and leaving as the one in control. His eyes, sharp and calculating, swept across the room like a cold blade, taking in everything. The stiff posture of the officer, the unease in Catherine's expression, the way the other employees avoided eye contact. The moment he stepped inside, the energy in the store shifted so fast it was almost suffocating. Jasmine could see it happening in real time. The officer, who had been standing tall and unbothered just moments ago, suddenly shifted on his feet, his stance less certain now. He straightened his shoulders as if trying to regain some level of confidence, but it was clear he felt the change. Catherine, who had been so smug, so sure of herself before, lost all color in her face. She knew she had made a mistake. And Jasmine, for the first time since walking into the store, she let herself relax just a fraction. She wasn't alone anymore. Her father's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Can you explain to me exactly why my daughter is being treated like a criminal?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight behind his words was enough. The officer hesitated. Jasmine saw it, the flicker of uncertainty, the brief flash of panic in his eyes. There was no good answer to that question, because there had never been a real reason to treat Jasmine like a suspect in the first place. The officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we received a call." Malcolm held up a hand. "A call about what exactly?" the officer faltered. Malcolm took another slow step forward, his gaze never leaving the officer's face. "Did my daughter steal something?" Silence. "Did she cause a disturbance?" Silence. "Did she threaten anyone?" The officer exhaled, shifting uncomfortably under Malcolm's unblinking stare. "No, sir." Malcolm nodded once, as if confirming what he already knew, and then he turned to Catherine. If she had looked nervous before, she looked downright terrified now. Jasmine almost felt sorry for her. "Almost?" "You call the police on all teenage customers?" Malcolm asked, his voice eerily calm, "or just the ones who look like my daughter?" Catherine visibly flinched. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Jasmine could practically see the wheels turning in her head. She was scrambling for a way out of this. Scrambling for an excuse. But there was none, because everyone in this store had seen what happened. There was no twisting the narrative, no rewriting history. She had called the police not because Jasmine had done anything wrong, but because of what she assumed about her. Jasmine wasn't a threat. She was a teenage girl shopping for a gift for her mother. And yet, Catherine had treated her like she didn't belong here. And now she was paying the price for that assumption. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Catherine opened her mouth again, her fingers twisting together in front of her, and Jasmine could already tell whatever she was about to say wouldn't be enough. I sincerely apologize if there was any misunderstanding," Catherine finally said, her voice shaky, forced. Malcolm's expression didn't change. "Misunderstanding," he repeated, his tone flat. "That's what you call this?" Catherine swallowed hard. "I was only acting in the best interest of the store." Jasmine almost laughed. "By assuming my daughter was a threat," Malcolm pressed. Catherine hesitated. It was such a small pause, barely a second. But that second sealed it. She had no real answer, because the truth, the real truth, was something she didn't want to say out loud. Malcolm exhaled slowly, shaking his head just slightly. "People like you," he murmured, "don't even realize the damage you cause." Catherine flinched like she'd been slapped. Jasmine watched it all unfold, her pulse steady now, her heart no longer hammering in her chest. She had spent the last half hour feeling powerless. But now she could feel the scales tipping. She wasn't the one being questioned anymore. The officer shifted awkwardly beside them. "Sir," he started, as if trying to salvage what was left of this disaster. "Is there anything else I can do?" Malcolm turned his gaze back to him, unreadable. "I assume there's no actual reason for you to be here," Malcolm said smoothly. A long pause. Then, finally, the officer gave a small shake of his head. "No, sir." "Then I'd suggest you leave before I start asking why taxpayer money is being wasted on personal bias." That did it. The officer stiffened slightly, then gave a curt nod and walked toward the exit. The door shut behind him with a finality that sent a clear message: game over. Catherine was drowning now, and she knew it. Jasmine took a slow, deep breath, standing a little taller, feeling a little lighter. Her father had come, and just like that, everything had changed. The silence in Lancaster Jewelers felt suffocating. The kind of silence that wasn't just quiet, it was loaded, charged, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Jasmine Carter stood beside her father, Malcolm, watching as the store's once commanding manager, Catherine Whitmore, looked like she wished she could disappear. A few minutes ago, she had all the power. She had called the police with ease, assuming she had control over the situation. Now her hands were shaking. Her carefully curated confidence had shattered, and in its place was a woman scrambling to find a way out of the mess she had created. But there was no way out, and Malcolm Carter was going to make sure of that. "I need the contact information for your corporate office." His voice was calm, measured, but there was something behind it that made it impossible to argue with. Catherine blinked, as if she hadn't fully processed the demand. Then, when she realized what he was asking, her lips parted slightly. "Sir, Malcolm just lifted a single brow, the kind of look that said, 'Do not waste my time.'" Catherine swallowed hard, hands fumbling beneath the counter as she reached for something. A moment later, she pulled out a sleek business card, her fingers visibly trembling as she handed it over. Malcolm took it without breaking eye contact. He didn't even have to look at it, because they both knew what it meant. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, and Catherine knew it too. Jasmine had spent the last half hour feeling helpless. But as she watched this unfold, that feeling was long gone. She stood tall beside her father, not shrinking, not apologizing for existing in a space where people like Catherine had tried to tell her she didn't belong. Her father was about to walk out, but before he could, something flickered in his expression, something sharper, something intentional. He turned his gaze to the glass case, to the necklace Jasmine had originally asked to see, the one Catherine had refused to show her, and then, without looking at her, Malcolm spoke. "She'll take the necklace." The words weren't a suggestion, they weren't a request, they were a command. Catherine went completely still. For a split second, she almost looked like she was going to argue. But the thing was, she couldn't. Because how could she possibly refuse now? Jasmine felt a strange, quiet satisfaction as she watched Catherine struggle to compose herself. Her hands twitched slightly as she reached for the key at her waist, and for the first time, she moved with hesitation. Not because she was worried about the necklace, but because she understood now. She understood that she had treated Jasmine like an intruder in this store. She understood that she had called the police on a 16-year-old girl for no reason at all. And worst of all, she understood that there was no undoing it. So with no other choice, Catherine finally unlocked the glass case. She reached inside, pulling out the delicate diamond necklace with careful, deliberate movements. The same hands that had once held power over Jasmine now trembled as she placed the necklace on the counter. Jasmine stepped forward. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, she was the one in control. She picked up the necklace, rolling the pendant between her fingers. It really was beautiful, the kind of piece her mother would love. But now it meant something more than just a birthday gift. It was a statement, a reminder. She looked up at Catherine, who refused to meet her eyes. Jasmine could see it all now, the regret, the humiliation, the way Catherine had finally realized the cost of what she had done. But Jasmine didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Instead, Malcolm pulled out his wallet and slid a platinum credit card across the counter. "Charge it." Catherine flinched. She looked at the card like it burned her, like the mere act of running it through the machine was its own kind of punishment. Her fingers shook as she picked it up, punching in the transaction details. The seconds stretched, heavy and thick with meaning. When the receipt finally printed, Catherine carefully tore it off, folding it with precise movements. Then, as she reached across the counter to hand it back to Malcolm, her fingers brushed against his. It was the lightest touch, barely anything, and yet she flinched, like she had been burned. Like for the first time she truly felt the weight of her actions. Malcolm took the bag with the necklace inside and turned to Jasmine. Without a word, he placed a firm hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward the door. But just before they walked out, he paused. One last moment, one last message. His voice was quiet when he spoke, but there was no mistaking the warning in his tone. "You should ask yourself if this is the legacy you want to leave behind." Catherine's lips parted slightly. She looked like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. Because what could she possibly say? What could possibly fix this? And then, just like that, Malcolm and Jasmine walked out, leaving Catherine standing in the middle of the store, holding a business card that felt heavier than anything she had ever touched. The day had been long. Jasmine Carter lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, letting her mind replay everything that had happened at Lancaster Jewelers. The cold stares, the whispered conversations, the suffocating silence when the police officer had walked in. And then, of course, her father. The moment Malcolm Carter stepped into that store, everything had shifted. The looks of superiority had turned into looks of panic. The officer, who had once stood so sure of himself, had suddenly been reduced to a man grasping for an explanation that didn't exist. And Catherine Whitmore. She had learned in real time what it felt like to lose all control. Jasmine exhaled slowly, rolling onto her side. On her desk, the small bag from Lancaster Jewelers sat untouched. The necklace. The one she had worked so hard to buy. The one that had nearly cost her her dignity. The excitement of gifting it to her mother had been tainted. It wasn't just jewelry anymore. It was a reminder. Her phone buzzed beside her. Then again. And again. She frowned, reaching for it. Her lock screen was flooded with notifications. Twitter, Instagram, messages from Tiana. Her stomach twisted as she swiped her phone open. Then she saw it. A video. A video that had already gone viral. She tapped the link. Immediately, the screen filled with footage from Lancaster Jewelers, but not from the store's security cameras. Someone inside the store had recorded everything. The video started with Catherine Whitmore whispering into the store phone, stealing glances at Jasmine. Then, it cut to the moment the police officer entered, scanning the room before immediately locking onto Jasmine like she had already been convicted of something. Then came Malcolm Carter, the way he walked in. The way the entire energy in the store shifted the second his presence filled the room. The conversation between him and the officer. The moment he asked, "Can you explain to me exactly why my daughter is being treated like a criminal?" The store fell silent, just as it had in real life. The video then cut to Malcolm turning his sharp gaze to Catherine. "Do you call the police on all teenage customers, or just the ones who look like my daughter?" Catherine stammering. Her failure to explain herself. The video ended with Malcolm's parting words. "You should ask yourself if this is the legacy you want to leave behind." And just like that, the screen faded to black. Jasmine blinked. She hadn't even realized she was holding her breath. She scrolled down to the caption, heart pounding in her ears. It read, 16-year-old girl profiled at high-end jewelry store. Her dad is the FBI director, the store's manager, speechless. Her stomach tightened, and then she saw the numbers, the retweets, the comments, the shares. The video had been posted only an hour ago and already had millions of views. This wasn't just a moment in a store anymore. This had become a movement. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification. This time from a news account. Breaking: Lancaster Jewelers under fire for racial profiling incident involving FBI director's daughter. Jasmine scrolled, her chest tightening as she skimmed the headlines flooding her timeline. Luxury jewelry store accused of racial bias. Customer was the FBI chief's daughter. Black teen stopped by police over buying a necklace. Her father's response shocks store. Lancaster Jewelers faces public backlash after viral racial profiling video. Her best friend Tiana had texted her 3 times already. "Tiana, girl, check your Twitter right now. Tiana, you're trending. Tiana, I'm serious." This is huge. Jasmine's heart pounded. She clicked on Lancaster Jewelers and scrolled through the thousands of posts. Some were filled with outrage at Brooklyn J. She was 16, just trying to buy her mom a necklace, and they called the cops on her. "Are you kidding me?" At Justice for All, if her dad wasn't the FBI director, how do y'all think this would have ended? Others were defending the store, trying and failing to justify what happened. At Jewelry Lover 89, we don't even know the full story. Maybe she was acting suspicious. At Luxury Shopper, stores have the right to call security if they feel uncomfortable. Sorry, but I don't see the issue. Jasmine's jaw clenched, uncomfortable. She had been nothing but polite, nothing but calm. And yet, that hadn't been enough. Her phone buzzed again. A notification from Lancaster Jewelers' official account. She clicked it immediately. The statement was short. "We sincerely apologize for today's incident at our Chicago location. The actions taken by our store manager do not reflect our company's values. Effective immediately, she has been placed on administrative leave pending further review." Jasmine stared at the screen. Administrative leave, not fired, just set aside. The words felt empty. Her father had been right. Justice doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just feels like wait, a knock at her door. She looked up as Malcolm stepped in, his face unreadable. "You saw it," he said. Jasmine nodded. "Yeah." Her father walked inside, sitting at the edge of her bed. "How do you feel?" Jasmine let out a sharp exhale. "Exposed," she admitted. She gestured at her phone. "I mean, it's everywhere." Malcolm studied her for a moment before speaking. "This isn't just about you anymore." She knew that. She could feel it. "It's weird," she admitted. "I wanted her to be held accountable, but now that it's actually happening," she hesitated. "I don't know if I feel better." Her father nodded, like he understood it better than she did. "Justice doesn't always feel good," he said. "Sometimes it just feels like wait." She let his words settle over her. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification. She didn't even need to check. She knew the story was still spreading, still reaching people. Jasmine looked at the small shopping bag on her desk. She finally opened it. The necklace glinted under her bedroom light, delicate and beautiful. But now it wasn't just about her mother's birthday. It was something else, something bigger. A reminder that people like Catherine existed. A reminder that she had been forced to prove she belonged. A reminder that she would never let this happen again, not to her, not to anyone else. She looked up at her father, meeting his gaze. "I think I get it now," she said softly. Malcolm gave her a small nod. "Good." Jasmine closed her fingers around the necklace, feeling its weight. This wasn't the ending, it was just the beginning.